So our first step is going to be to drop the exhaust. So before you do that, put some pads down on your driveway or wherever you're dropping it to. If you're on a lift, you don't need to necessarily do this, but you want to have something to be able to support the exhaust, because we're not going to disconnect it at the downpipes. We're just going to drop the rear end of it. So you want to make sure you have something so that you're not putting too much load on the downpipes and you're not ruining your tips. The second step is going to be to remove the cross brace, the tunnel brace, and then we're going to start lowering the exhaust. We're going to undo all the bolts in the rear of the exhaust, so they're all behind this cross brace. To start the cross brace, this is a 16 millimeter. There's 4 of them. That's it for the 16, everything else is 13. Shouldn't be very tight, but just be careful if you're going to use an impact gun. I know that I've taken this down before, so these aren't going to be really tight, but just sneak up on them. You don't want to strip bolts. So there's 2 up here by the front driver's side corner of the gas tank. One of them actually holds the tank in. One of 4 bolts that holds it in. So that one, when you're lining back up, you have to be a little bit careful to make sure you have everything lined up right. As an alternative, you can try to remove all the hangers. You could actually push these hangers off. It's up to you how you want to do this. Either way, the exhaust has to drop, so I just like undoing the bolts.
I'll turn around right here. That's good, let them play.
You see the gas tank came down a little bit there. And the next 2 are right across. Right above me. Careful when you're under the car, don't get stuff in your eyes. These are just 2 nuts. And then the last 2 you need to do are at the very back, above the tips. You'll probably need a good size extension to get up there. And then as you drop these, the exhaust is going to fall. So be either ready to catch it, some of the body part or one of your friends. Lower down onto your cardboard, and now you have room. So our next step is to get the heat shield that's covering the center support bearing down. 4 10 millimeters, they're just these little plastic nuts or little stamp nuts, so it doesn't take much here. Get them off. These plastic nuts are actually supposed to stay with the splash shield, so they won't pop off. Sometimes they do, but yeah, like this one came down, the other one stuck, so whatever. Stamped ones. Alright, and then the heat shield, you're just going to basically pull the plastic splash shield down enough to get the heat shield down and out. It's easy to bend it, just keep that in mind. issues later when you put it back together. It could result in rattling, so you know, be a little gentle with it at least. Make your life a little easier if you remove more bolts than I did, or more nuts than I did. Get a little more clearance out of this thing. Side. There you go. Lots of rocks and stuff, so watch your eyes. Get that out of the way, and now we have access to our center support bearing. So at this point, you have access to your center support bearing. There's two bolts holding it in, the stock carrier, and what we actually need to do at this point is we need to remove the stock carrier and the rubber bushing that's all molded around the center support bearing. So in order to do that, because it's molded in, we actually have to cut this carrier off. And so the best way I've found to do it is to leave it all bolted up like it is. That way you're not fighting it moving around. And make a cut here all the way up through all the metal until you hit into the rubber, and then here on the other side as well. And that's going to give you a pretty good gap, and you're going to be able to come in there and just spread them open and then drop the drive shaft basically out of the metal frame that goes around it. And at that point you can unbolt it. Alright, so I've got the drive shaft here off the car. I just wanted to explain a little bit better with better lighting and everything what exactly you need to cut. So on the OEM carrier bracket, you're going to cut right here, and that's going to allow you to spread this thing open to drop the drive shaft out of it, right? Before you're able to get the drive shaft out, there is a layer of rubber that's going to connect this bearing here, the center support bearing, to the carrier itself. And so you're going to need to cut all the way around it in order to release the drive shaft. And so what it is, you have a kind of an accordion shaped piece of rubber that's coming up that runs kind of all the way around this. So it's kind of a vertical rib with a little bit of accordion to it. And we need to remove not only the carrier, but then we need to remove all of that rubber. And you can see I've left a base layer of rubber on here, so basically removed this center rib. So cut down as flush as you can. If you leave a little bit in the middle, it's not a big deal. But don't remove this base layer of rubber. You can see here where I tried to start removing this. It's molded right onto the bearing, and it's going to be a real pain. So I've actually designed these bushings to go on top of this. So if you remove all that rubber all the way down to the middle, this will actually be loose, so don't do that. And then you can see the way these line up here. There's kind of a lip here on the right, and it's actually a flexible kind of overhang of rubber on the right side here. And so this should kind of just go right down there in that lip, and then this other side should hang off of the left, which is the rear of the vehicle. Yeah, front, back. Right, so those will just kind of clamp around there nice, and we'll go under the car here and attach it. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is install the new carrier around the center support bearing. Start with your bushings installed into the new carrier. Make sure they're nice and lined up and sitting in there snug. We're just going to slide this up. Make sure you're, again, getting it nice and straight, not crooked on there. Then we're going to start the bolts. A little bit tricky with the exhaust in the way, but do a bolt. One started. Alright, second one started, and we're just gonna slowly clamp this thing down. Go back and forth side to side, especially if you have one of the stiffer bushings. Alright, should be on there secure. Rock it back and forth, make sure you're on there square. What we're going to do is bolt this back up. And your last step is going to be put this shield back on, and then you'll just put the exhaust back up. This heat shield, remember, goes kind of in between this plastic splash shield and the other heat shield. I suppose you could probably put it on the outside, it wouldn't matter. This is how we found it, so we'll put it back the way we found it. Might have to bend it a little bit to get under here. A little bit of a pain. Just decided it wants to stick back up. No, definitely don't use any kind of power tools to tighten these things back up. They're just plastic. So. In case it matters, the ones that are stamped metal from the front, and then the plastic ones go on the back. And just use like a nut driver or a very small hand tool to tighten those. They don't need much at all. Just strip them out easy. Alright, so to get the exhaust back up, I like to start at the back, as that just holds everything up nicely. So you get your two 13mm nuts you're going to have to put back on. Kind of bench press this thing up. Kind of going to have to work around some of the plastic. Now we've got 2 nuts and 2 bolts that have to go back on to these hangers. The nuts go on the driver's side. I like to do those first because it kind of holds the exhaust hub nice. Because the bolts on the other side are, one goes up through the fuel tank like I mentioned. So it's nice to have that kind of up sitting flush and not trying to support the weight of the fuel tank at the same time. Again, just use caution if you're going to use power tools on this. Don't want to cross thread things. I'm not responsible. Definitely don't look up at it while you're tightening stuff up. One thing to look at here, this is the AW Touring exhaust on here. I noticed with some exhaust systems, you hit the heat shield here with the hanger. I don't know if it's just the way it sits, but if you're starting to rub a hole in your heat shield and hence in your gas tank, you should probably chop this hanger down a little bit. I went clear through it and started putting a big gouge in my tank on my other car. Not where you want to be, really. Flanges on the outside should be facing down.